right, hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, The Role of Compliance Plays in Security. My name is Ashley Limbers and I'll be your moderator. I'm the marketer here at Total Computer Solutions and I'm excited to be hosting this session today. Total Computer Solutions is a full service provider of IT support and services, including network security, cloud computing, network administration, and managed backup services in Central North Carolina. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Barry Utesh. Barry is the president of Total Computer Solutions. Barry graduated from the University of North Carolina in Greensboro with a degree in business information and support systems. He started in 1990 as the sole employee in a 12 by 24 office. TCS currently has 26 employees on staff and has served North Carolina for over 31 years. When asked to explain what we do, Barry replies, "We provide peace of mind to small and medium-sized businesses in Central North Carolina." Before I hand the mic over to Barry, I have a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover about this presentation and the Zoom platform. First, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session and will be emailed to you afterwards. We would love to hear from you during today's webinar. If you have a question for our speaker, please feel free to type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. We'll be answering questions at the end of the session. If we don't get to your question today, we'll be sure to follow up with you afterwards. So without further ado, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming our president, Barry Utesh. Barry, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Appreciate you all being here. I know that the demands of business, there's lots of ways that you can choose to spend your time, and appreciate the fact that you've taken time to be part of this, and sincerely hope that you find this to be of value. So our title is The Role Compliance Plays in Cybersecurity. As I look through the list of participants, some of you have compliance requirements, either be HIPAA, maybe Sarbanes, or possibly NIST, but many of you may not have a direct need to be compliant. You're a manufacturer, you don't sell to the federal government, et cetera. And so one of the things I want to highlight today is that it can still be of great value to you to use some of the compliance metrics and to improve your security by essentially being compliant, even though you don't need to be compliant. One of the things that's really important if you want to be a company that has tight security and maybe even compliant is you have a compliance officer. For those customers of ours that have medical HIPAA regulations, you have to have a HIPAA officer. That's true for NIST, true for Sarbanes. So one of the first steps is really picking somebody and assigning the responsibility to them. We know if there's more than one person who's responsible, then nobody's responsible, right? And this person does not need to be technical, right? I want to highlight the fact that a lot of compliance is really an administrative role. It's about crossing T's and dotting I's and making sure that things are documented. And so that shouldn't or doesn't necessarily need to be someone who's a C-level person in the organization. They need C-level support, but they don't need to be terribly technical as well. If you think that compliance sounds challenging, well, it does. Yeah, you're right. If you look at the HIPAA regulations, it was August of 1996 when then President Bill Clinton signed that into law, but it was many years before really any fines started being levied or things really began to solidify. And that will be true, I think, as we look to the future as well. It is possible that even within a single company, you'll have different regulations that apply to different sectors. For example, if one division of the company does business in Canada or in France, they may fall under regulations or guidelines that the rest of the business doesn't have to. And so, one other thing I guess I'll highlight is, we've done our panel discussions every year for the last several years where we have an attorney and maybe an FBI agent and I think last year we had a ethical hacker. And so we talk about all the different aspects of cybersecurity. And one of the things that the legal expert typically brings up is, if you're a law firm and you deal in medical malpractice, or you deal with some car accidents where you have medical data on a client, and you keep that information on your network, then in many ways you do, the requirements would say you need to be HIPAA compliant. So I just want to highlight that doesn't always mean that you are a medical practitioner. It could be that you just have that kind of information. And if you're a regular business that maybe keeps medical information on your employees, that could be the case as well. All right, so as we get started, as an overview, we're going to talk about regulations, and we're going to talk about standards, and they're two different things. They're both valuable, and so we'll go further into that in a moment. A high-level view so that you understand compliance, and then maintaining compliance within your organization. So we hear a lot in the news about cybercrimes, right? The fuel company recently, we hear about breaches, but we really don't hear much about the fines that often follow. And I suppose that's partly because it takes a long time for the courts to decide what the fine should be, and then companies appeal, and so that thing could go back and forth for a lot of years. Again, if you happen to be in a regulated industry, this slide gives you an idea about the kinds of settlements that you might expect. Interesting, as we were doing some research on this, the courts weigh the event, right, and how egregious it was. Were you just being a knucklehead and you didn't have a firewall, or was it something really obscure? And then they also look at the ability of the organization to pay. And so those two factors go into determining what the fines end up being. So compliance regulations typically address security and privacy together. Okay, and they also lay down directives to safeguard a company's IT systems and data from cyber attacks. Regulations put a responsibility on companies to protect themselves from accidental breaches. Something that is often forgotten is that data regulations also cover paper records in a similar manner to digital records. As a matter of fact, there was a medical practice in Greensboro that was fined for dumping medical records into a random dumpster when they obviously should have been shredded. And the fines for that particular practice were enough to cause them to have to close their doors. And so with respect to online and network data, companies can undertake several actions to protect their systems and their information: firewalls, intrusion detection systems, robust passwords, dual factor authentication. These are all probably things that you're familiar with: antivirus, automated security patching and updating, training employees. And when you put all these together, these actions start a company on its journey towards compliance. They're kind of almost foundational to the process. Knowing what expertise is available and which standards are relevant to your particular industry are the first steps to ensure that your organization is regulation compliant. So compliance regulations are written by legal experts. They're often crafted in a way that allows them to be debated by teams of experts in a court of law. This does not mean that you can weasel your way out of a compliance error. So I wouldn't be foolish about it, but if you do have a situation, make sure you hire a good attorney. And I suspect that you may be able to reduce your fines. It does mean that if you're being diligent and something unfortunate does happen, there's some ability there to negotiate. There are positive and negative consequences to compliance regulations. On the positive side, compliance does not happen in isolation, right? And organizations must work at it. And that work provides a framework to secure the company's systems and their data. Demonstrating compliance, I won't say it may cost additional resources, it will cost additional resources, but the result is a more secure company. And a more secure company will reassure existing customers and build the company reputation. That'll help to attract new customers. In addition, company structure and general security awareness are enhanced when staff responsibilities related to data risk are clearly established. Again, documentation. On the negative side, penalties for organizations found to be out of compliance, again, depends on where in the world the offense occurs. Usually there's a range of penalties that are available to regulators or prosecutors. And again, they weigh the seriousness of the failure as they consider things. You know, on the upper end of the scale, as you saw in a previous slide, fines can run to the millions of dollars, and people may even go to prison, those that are deemed responsible. But penalties on the lower end of the spectrum may be even worse in the long term. I don't know about you, but I personally avoided Target for almost a year after that reported breach. So reputational damage can be even more harmful than, say, the fines, and can reduce a company's standing among its customers, and long-term costs of that could be significant. So conforming with information security standards can significantly assist an organization on the path to improving their security. So what is the difference between standards and regulations? Well, the main distinction lies in compliance. Complying with standards is voluntary, but complying with regulations is mandatory. Carrying that a little further, standards are guidelines, often drawn up by industry actors, agreed upon via a consensus process, and those are then approved by some sort of a recognized or standardized body. PCI is a good example of a standard. On the other hand, regulations are legal and or industry requirements, and they are typically laid down by a government or some sort of a statutory authority, and those can be used to force organizations to carry out certain security measures or impose penalties if those measures are not carried out. So I want to talk about how standards can help you reach compliance. And again, we would suggest that the first step towards compliance is conforming with relevant standards in your industry. There are some general standards, and then there's some sector-specific standards. There's a couple of well-established international standards, one of which is ISO 27000. And that's really kind of a family of a dozen standards that helps companies to manage security of assets, financial information, intellectual property, employee details, or information entrusted to them by third parties. And again, if you're in that segment, you understand that there's different codes within that, like, 27002 is a code of practice for information and security controls. 27005 is information security risk management. 27010 is intersector and inter-organizational communication. And then, as I already mentioned, PCI SSC, that was the Payment Card Industry Security Standard Council. That organization was founded in 2006 by American Express, Discover, MasterCard, Visa, and they work with payment cards. And that includes financial institutions, point of sale vendors, hardware, software developers who create those processing of the card swipes. So the core work involved with PCI data security standards, which was a framework that they developed for security processes to include prevention, detection, and reaction to security incidents. Again, standards are not legal documents, and various bodies can publish guidelines that may be useful. Like there's one called the Cloud Security Alliance, which provides a cloud control matrix that rests on customized relationships to other industry accepted security standards, regulations, and frameworks, such as ISO 27001 and 2. So anyway, before going too far on any set of standards, you must assess how much work will be involved to implement those standards. For example, changes to existing work practices, staff training, additional resources, say online storage, gathering and storing of accompanying evidence, and how many of your practices are already falling within those standards. So again, kind of use these questions to develop a cost-benefit analysis. So would the costs outweigh the benefits for some non-core standards that are perhaps not fully relevant to your organization? So let's talk a little bit about where do we go with all of this? And these are some terminology that we want to go through. So as you think about securing your organization, you need to make a list of those assets that you frankly just can't do business without them, right? Some of those may be physical, some of those may be human resources, and then some are likely, applications and data. So creating a comprehensive list is really a first step in this process, and really should involve, key players in the company that would be able to speak to, what are our most valuable assets. So then the next step, once you have your list of assets, is really getting those into a rank order. So quite frankly, securing assets is going to be expensive, and you don't want to spend money securing low-ranking assets, right? You want to spend your money on the most important assets. So the other terminology in here, what is the threat to our this particular asset? What is the vulnerability, right? What are its weaknesses? Are there countermeasures that we can put in place to help mitigate those weaknesses? If it's unavailable, what do we expect our loss to be? And then a longer term impact, what might happen if that is not available for us for 2 weeks. So again, identifying what the assets are, what the threat to those assets is, the vulnerabilities that could be exploited, countermeasures, again, going through that, and that will take quite some time to analyze what are the most important things in your business. Once you have done that, then this is it's a similar idea, but slightly different. So maybe a little higher level view of this. So most strategies for organizational risk management are built on a continuum, right? So identifying those assets that are most valuable, analyzing, which probably encompasses a number of things, evaluate, treat. Actually, this is moving a step beyond that previous list. So now we're actually moving into treating, and then ongoing would be monitoring for the future. In contrast to other headline risks within an organization, such as maybe financial, operational, and strategic, compliance risk can be interpreted as being externally driven, right? So identifying laws that the organization must comply with is an early part of assessing compliance risk. Best practices or standards and initial compliance should be stress tested at the risk management stage. How far inside of the boundary of standards and everyday operations and practices do you want to be? If pushed, would they drop outside those safety zones? And how close would they come to actually being considered non-compliant? So again, that monitoring component, that regular analysis of compliance must be given attention in any organization's overall risk management program. And again, responsibility must be assigned to an appropriate person who will keep compliance in consideration of, legally, but also separately as an operational and a reputational important activity. Again, your industry may not require compliance. However, being able to say to a major supplier or maybe a major client that you are in alignment with standards, even above and beyond what your industry requires, that could be a real strategic advantage. Of course, if you're going to make this statement that you meet these standards of compliance, you better be able to back it up. And again, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, keeping accurate records, being able to show reports, logs, standard operating procedures will be important. If you can't produce the evidence of compliance, then you're not compliant. So do you need outside help? Obviously this is part of what we do. If you're a business that wishes to align with compliance regulations or standards, you're going to need a point person inside your company. I mentioned that earlier. So do you need outside help? Ask yourself, do we have the experience to interpret and apply these regulations within our organization? If the competencies required are not in-house, or if you think your in-house resources would benefit from additional help, then it may be best to subcontract all or part of this to some external consultant. For an organization who maybe can't justify a full-time data security expert, hiring an outside professional may be money well spent. Many security companies supply assessment services against recognized standards and best practices, and they will provide advice to improve security and data privacy, and then the documented results can be used to evaluate the organization's performance. So having an outside party to lean on if you are audited might be a benefit in the same way as having a tax professional to lean on if your return is audited. Some of these are fairly common. Of course, Graham-Leach requires companies that offer consumer financial products or services like loans, financial advice, or insurance to explain their information sharing practices to their customers and safeguard sensitive data. HIPAA regulation contains both a privacy rule and a security rule and covers clinical applications, electronic health records, radiology, pharmacy, lab results, etc. GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation. Particular attention within, that's mostly an EU thing, but they do focus some on healthcare in that regulation as well. And then a couple that I wasn't aware of, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, where the privacy of a student's educational records, this law applies to schools that receive funds under any applicable program of the U.S. Department of Education. And then, yes, even the criminal justice system, the security policy covers lawful use and appropriate protection of criminal justice information. So this is something that you're going to be hearing about more as they are continuing to finalize this, the cybersecurity maturity model certification. And basically this is being put together by the Department of Defense, Johns Hopkins University, Carnegie Mellon, along with several other organizations, small business programs, et cetera. And so they're building this model by evaluating and bringing together cybersecurity requirements from a variety of sources, including NIST 800, 171, NIST 853, ISO 27001, aerospace industry NAS 9933 standard, and the SANS Institute for Critical Security Controls. Again, so CMMC will be comprehensive. It actually spans 18 domains, including access control, configuration management, identification and authentication, incident response, risk assessment, system information integrity. And each of these domains will be comprised of capabilities, which in turn will be comprised of practices and processes. And process institutionalization, like policies, plans, processes, procedures to manage the environment where this CUI resides, is a key CMMC differentiator because it provides assurance that the practices are being implemented effectively and in a suitable manner. This next slide is going to be similar, but add a little bit more detail to what you just saw there. So I mentioned that there were 18 active domains. And then on the right-hand side, you see a slightly different graphical representation of, the basic, the intermediate, the good, the proactive, and the advanced. So, but the 18 domains that this touches on, and just by way of explanation, so access control, okay, who can get to it? How do they get to it? How are they authenticated, right? And that spills then over slightly to the right. All of these are things that taken together, each of those 18 things, and then layered on top of the capabilities on the right-hand side, you might be a 1 on some of them, and you might be a 4 on others, or even a 5 on others, but trying to get all 18 of those domains to, I would suggest, a minimum of a 3, and then shooting for, a 4 or even a 5. Again, using those graphics, I would suggest that if you can get all of these to a 3, you are probably compliant, well above most businesses today, all but maybe those that are in the most secure parts of the Department of Defense. And those folks probably have to be in a level 4 and striving for a level 5 would be my assumption on that. So again, I mentioned earlier, regulations are written by legal experts, and so they are written in a way that allows them to be debated, right? Which is a little different than maybe what we'd like to see in the IT world. We'd much prefer to see a list of things that need to be checked off. So once you've chosen a compliance administrator, you can begin identifying standards and then regulations relevant to your organization. Again, remember to start with standards that seem to align with your organization. And then once you have those under control, then move on and begin working on regulations. I believe that it's only just a matter of time before we're going to start seeing regulations that apply to all US companies coming out of Washington, in the same way that they implemented and then put into law the HIPAA regulations. I think that we will see some minimum set of standards that all companies will be expected to comply with. And so again, is that this year? Is that 5 years? Can't answer that, but I do expect that we will see that. This is a playbook for NIST 800-171. This is free from the federal government. The link to the playbook is at the bottom, but if you wanted to Google it, you would just say NIST 800-171 regulations. You do want to make sure that it takes you to a government website, not a sales or a company website, so just be aware of that. But it's there, and it's not a step-by-step instruction manual, but if you wanted to, you could probably create a step-by-step manual from that. I was going to open that just quickly. Always dangerous to do in the middle of a presentation. And it is 113 pages, so it's pretty extensive. Most of that is explanations on what and why. But if we get about halfway through this, maybe 2/3 of the way through, here we go. You do, and I know you can't read this, but it does indicate that, within access control, how are you doing account management? How are you access enforcement? How are you handling remote access? I mean, it does give you a decent list of items that you could build a practice from. So again, just wanted to show you that information is there. It is readily available. And again, once you assign someone to this role, that might be a reasonable place to start. They'll need coffee. So again, wrapping up, yes, you do need someone inside your organization that's responsible for helping you to stay compliant. This is primarily, but not completely, an administrative role. Most of what you need from them is to develop the systems that log and confirm policies and procedures. Things like a user's ability to access files, how we dispose of hard drives and PCs. Is there data on a PC that maybe shouldn't be there? And again, as we dig deeper, things like the copier that you disposed of last year has a hard drive in it. You may not even have known that. That hard drive stores some of the more recent stuff that was sent to the copier or printed. And so again, how that is disposed of. Again, document, right? When there's a decision made, that needs to be documented. A change management process that needs to be followed and has to be documented. If the compliance officer or the compliance team has determined, for example, that the password length needs to be a minimum of 12 characters and passwords can never be reused, that needs to be documented and it needs to be followed by all. Things like multi-factor, you really ought to have that anywhere you can have it. It does do a lot in helping security. Regular patching and updating to correct vulnerabilities. Again, that's something that TCS does for ourselves and we do it for all of our clients. VPN access is mandatory for anyone outside the organization. Again, that's just a good practice. Logging of all these items so that if something happens, you can prove that you were being diligent. And if that is the case, the courts may have some additional leniency on you. Not having a change management process is troubling because changes that get made haphazardly may impact security in another area that wasn't considered. I'm going to assume that some of you have accounting data audited on some kind of a routine basis. Compliance requires the same level of thoroughness. The final piece of compliance jigsaw puzzle is auditing. Should it be done internally? Should it be done externally? Should it be done both? Probably just like auditing your books. Yes, right? All of the above. Sometimes it's internal, sometimes it's external. And if you're not auditing on a regular basis, are you sure you're still doing a good job with staying compliant? And so part of doing an internal compliant, obviously, is to help you uncover areas where maybe you've become deficient and need to shore things up before you bring in that outside compliance. So thanks. We're wrapping up here. Thank you so much for being here. If you are an existing client of ours, we may have already helped you with this risk assessment, but the process takes a couple of hours. We do a Q&A with the person who's inside of your business who knows what those answers to those questions are. And again, just by way of example, do you have a password length and complexity requirement, and is that documented, right? Do you require regular password changes, and is that documented? Can you prove that password changes have been made? Again, the risk assessment will highlight many of the areas that you would need to shore up, and we're offering a special price on that for your attendance today. And Ashley, I see you popped up there. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Barry, for that insightful information. We'll go ahead and take time for questions. Just a reminder, please type those into the question box. And while we were presenting, or while Barry was presenting, we had a question come in. And so I'll go ahead and read that to you. This person says, need to understand all that is involved with credit card machine compliance. Need to know what equipment is needed. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll be straight up here. TCS, we sometimes will connect some of that equipment, but for the most part, we are not experts in PCI compliance. I do have some contacts that I can certainly refer you to. If you work with a bank or you work with a processing organization, they also would be a tremendous resource for compliance. Again, this isn't just electronic. Again, this is paper as well. I know, again, one of those folks that I know that's in this industry is a friend, and they would talk about, yeah, having that, not allowing that credit card to be seen by the security camera over your shoulder is an important, you want to kind of palm the card so that, and that's an extreme example, but there are certainly some regulations along those lines that we can, although we can't specifically help you, we can get you some resources there as well. So happy to do that.
Great. Barry, I think we've covered all the questions that we have for today. Is there anything that you wanted to say before we go?
Again, compliance and security is a never-ending process, and as your compliance gets better, as you tighten your security, the bad guys find new ways to thwart our best efforts. So it is a little bit of a cat and mouse game, but if you stop, that's when you get eaten. So keep advancing. And thanks for being with us.
Great. Thank you everyone for being here today. If you have any additional questions, please email those to info@tcsusa.com and check out our website for future events. And we'll see you guys next time. Thank you.